think we're really hard on ourselves. I think also we don't have to have all the answers or have some big plan. We just need to figure out what's the next best move to make and to make that move and learn from it.
Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Comeau.
Alchemists, welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and thank you so much for joining our community for another incredible connection. If you're listening for the first time, welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Take a minute before continuing the episode to follow our Instagram or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Links in the descriptions. And for those returning alchemists, take some time to expand our community and share this platform with one other person today. I'm so thankful for your passion and dedication to being better together. Now get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning. Today, I'm thrilled to have Meghan Lawson with us. Meghan is a kindness ambassador, a passionate advocate for collaboration, and someone who deeply believes in the power of story to connect people and create transformational change. With a background that spans nearly 2 decades in education, starting in the English language arts classroom, Meghan has since become a voice of hope and inspiration for educators. Her book, Legacy of Learning, offers practical strategies for educators to focus on what truly matters, with relatable stories and small moves that make big impact. Beyond her writing, Meghan has a remarkable ability to cultivate environments that promote storytelling, collaboration, and meaningful change, creating magic in schools every single day. Meghan, it's such an honor to have you on the show. Welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. And wow, quite an intro. I just feel I'm sitting taller listening to all of that. So thank you.
It's my favorite thing to actually probably do on the show, because as I read them and I come back and I get to talk about these people, I watch the video and I watch people get to light up as I share all of these amazing things people do. And people don't realize how many things they actually accomplish until something like that's read of them. So I love it. Thanks so much for taking time to join me. And I want to jump right into the biggest question that I ask people, which is, how did you get to where you are now?
So I had a fairly humbling start to education. I know so many people who have these beautiful stories about my mom was a teacher, or both my parents were educators, and I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher. I actually was a competitive dancer, and I thought I was going to move to New York and live out of a backpack and dance on Broadway. And my mom, a very practical single parent, said, you don't need a college degree to perform in shows. Why don't you get a college degree first? And I remember feeling like she's such a dream killer. But I did. So then I was like, well, I'm going to study television broadcasting. And she was like, they're going to, have you sweeping the newsroom for a decade before they put you behind a camera. And I was like, wow, another dream killed. But the truth is, I have a lot to thank her for, because she led me to this path of, okay, well, what else though? And I did not start my career loving teaching. I actually learned how to love teaching through experience. And I only tell that story because I think so often people think that you are a kid and you just discover your passion and you go off and you live this passion. But really, our students need experiences in order to develop passions, and so do we. And I have grown to deeply love both this profession and the impact that we can make in it. And so I've been a middle school teacher, I've been a high school teacher, I've been an assistant principal at a middle school, an elementary principal. I've held various district office roles. I've been an educational consultant, and I'm currently serving in my first year as an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning.
What an amazing journey. And, same as me, I didn't wake up in kindergarten and say I wanted to be a teacher. And the path that I took to get here is quite unique as well. So I appreciate those people that didn't feel called to it. But I also love connecting with people that do feel called to it. It's one of those professions that people just end up finding their way into, and it's usually rooted around an earth element or a core value that brings back to the bedrock of why people want to do the things they do. And your work celebrates kindness, connection, and storytelling, and that's rooted in something much deeper than just those words, which is probably why we are where we are and having the conversation we're having. But what life experiences or more moments helped shape the values that you have?
So I would say I have a core memory that I often come back to, and that's from my first grade year. So when I was in kindergarten, to take it back even one more year, my dad was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia. And in February 12th, actually, of my first grade year, he was supposed to come home. My mom was supposed to walk through the door with my dad because they had done everything that they could for him. But she walked through the door without him and had to break the news to me like only someone can to a first grader that my dad wasn't coming home. He would never be coming home. And I can remember sitting on my canopy bed, brown shag carpet. It was the 80s. And I flew off my bed, and in a fit of grief, I run to the window and I pull the blinds actually off the window. I'm just so overcome with emotion. And I turn to my mom, and my first question for her is, are we going to have enough food to eat? And I tell this story so many times, but every time I tell that part really is the only part I feel emotional about. Like I feel I can tell the other story, part of the story, and stay fairly composed. But I think it's because that's such a hard thing for someone so young to have to worry about. And yet there's many kids who worry about that and more. It's probably why I'm so easily triggered when we talk about, preparing these kids for the real world, because in doing so, we really minimize the experiences that they're having in their lives inside and outside of the schoolhouse. So a couple weeks pass, and it's time for me to go back to school. And my mom drove her powder blue 1986 Camry like to the front of the schoolhouse. And I remember feeling like it was going to take a Herculean level of strength to open that car door and walk away from her. Until my gaze meets the front of the school, and my teacher, Mrs. Bogus, had all of my friends smiling, waving, faces pressed against the glass, beckoning me into the school. And it was as if she had turned something terribly hard into a celebration of life and my return and life after loss. And she had my back countless times that school year. And so I think when I think about her and that school year and the many other educators and friends and people that have been there for me in my lifetime, it's made me realize just that there are no small moves in a school or in really in our lives. And so I think that's where my interest in kindness and small moves and the power we can have in each other's lives probably began.
Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that story. I just had a presentation from Dr. Allison, who has done worldwide studies on being values driven and what people are rooted in. And he talks so strongly about the value of experience. And the biggest part of that value is usually the disconnect that teachers have with the general population, where we don't realize how much the general population actually values experience. And to connect with them on that level in education and through learning and being creative through experience can actually help bridge the connection between teaching in the education world and then the rest of the world that's not involved in education. And it can make a huge difference in the support your classroom, your community, your school, whatever you're even leading sees, because people do value experience still. It's a very strong core value. Now, with that, you've written about the importance of these small practical moves for lasting change. What's one small action rooted in your values that's had a major impact on your work or a community you've served?
Deeply in small moves. And I love anytime somebody quotes research or the voices of other professionals. And my interest in small moves began when I stumbled into the book A Billion Hours of Good by Chris Field. And essentially, he says that if everybody spent 15 minutes a day trying to make the world better in some way that's personally meaningful to them, imagine how the world would change. And so then that got me thinking, okay, well, what does that look like in the span of a school day? So, if you have a 7.5 hour workday, that's roughly 4.5 minutes in a day. That's like 1% of your day. Just like 15 minutes would be 1% of the 24-hour day. And so then I was like, okay, well, what if you had a 50-minute bell? That's about 30 seconds. And so there's something about being so overwhelmed in this profession that I think drives us to think about, but what can I do and what can I manage right now? And so it's very appealing to me to think in terms of small moves. So for me, one move that I make is simply just moving myself closer to where the work is happening every day, proximity. So I wear my sneakers most of the time, unless I have some meeting where I need to look more adult and I wear more grown-up shoes. And I just go where the people are. I go where educators are. I go into classrooms. I go into the buildings. And as somebody in a district office, it keeps me rooted in the realities of what it takes every day. And then I'm also inspired by the amazing things I see kids doing, the amazing things I see teachers and principals doing. And so that's a value that I hold. And then when I can, I offer to jump in, right? Like lend a helping hand when you can. And there's just something satisfying about that when there's other complex, big problems that I'm still stuck figuring out how we're going to move forward.
And to model it for them and to walk arm in arm with them through the struggles they're going through is a huge testament to a value on relationships and a value on togetherness. And Dr. Rick Gilson says this really well, and I might butcher what he's saying, but he talked about how when you want to see something take action, you have to consider the motivations behind it, the behaviors behind it, and the prompt behind it. And they all multiply off of each other. And so if one of those factors is a factor of 0, you're not going to see the response. And so he talks about when working with change, you really need to focus on at least getting them to a factor of 1 prompt, 1 motivation, 1 behavior. And more often than not, he used the analogy of when people set these New Year's resolutions, they try to have that motivation factor at 30, 40, 50. And sure, the prompt at the start is maybe 5 to 10, but then it starts to drop. And by the time you hit March, that prompt is 0, that behavior is 0, or that motivation's gone to 0. And now you're not reaching your New Year's resolution because you haven't stayed at a factor of 1 for those categories. And it's the consistency behind it. So I appreciate the story shared there as well. Speaking of values, they're often tested during times of adversity. Overcoming challenges requires grit and determination. How has your commitment to kindness and transformational change carried you through tough moments?
Well, I'm still thinking about that research. It's reminding me of, I think I'm making some connections to the John Acuff's work. I don't know if you're familiar with any of his work around perfectionism. Yeah. And, if you have a big goal, cut it in half because you're more likely to continue to persevere. And the most important day is the first day that you don't reach your goal for the day and like how you respond the next day. I think that I can make a lot of connections to what I just said there and probably being gritty in the work. But I would say I think it's really easy to judge ourselves harshly and others harshly when the going gets tough. And so for me, I think I just am really focused on centering my own humanity and that of other people and remembering that everybody is somebody else's entire world, somebody else's even the adults are someone else's kid, right? And that we're whole people. And there's a lot of reasons why we bring different behaviors or reactions into school. And I think sometimes it's easy to get frustrated with adults when it feels like people are getting in the way of change, but there's often good reason why the behaviors look the way that they do. And if we can not judge and instead listen and foster some more curiosity inside of the reactions and behaviors, there's some kind of truth there that's important in figuring out how to move forward. So I'm just really focused on trying to be softer on myself and other people, soft on the people and harder on the problems would be a quote that I've gotten from the guys who wrote Otherful. And but that requires a lot of self-awareness and self-discipline and self-work, and that can get pretty exhausting. So I think it's amazing how much self-work goes into leadership. I used to be somebody who read a lot of practitioner books. I was reading cover to cover every Marzano and Hattie and DeFore book that I could find. And those are still really important books. But now in roles that I'm in now, I need to read more books, self-help books, probably, honestly, like self-development books, because there's nothing more dangerous, I think, than a leader who lacks self-awareness.
I love that statement because I also love the statement that the best leaders are always still learning how to lead. And so what you're sharing is a testament to your leadership qualities and what you're able to strive for and do. And in doing what you're doing, we're really trying to disrupt a current status quo of expectations of leaders and expectations of followers and what that dynamic looks like. And it's about creating that alignment, not to the person, but to the problem, which is what you talked about. We can all be aligned towards the same problem we're trying to solve. And once we have that alignment, we actually start to work more as a team. We start to collaborate. And once you collaborate through the work of Hadi, we know the impact of collective efficacy. It's huge. It's through the roof. So with that, though, in mind, what's one of the significant challenges you faced in trying to drive this change, and how did you persevere through it?
I'm in a new role, so I'll start with my new role, actually. I think my title gets in the way of the work sometimes, right? Like, oh, the assistant superintendent's here, like it's the assistant superintendent's in the room. And I don't know if you've seen the Barbie movie, but like, I'm just Ken, like I'm just Megan, right? And so I keep saying that in rooms that I'm in, and I also keep trying to cultivate spaces for vulnerability. And usually leaders have to go first in order for others to feel safe to do the same. Like I'm not saying we need our hands in our hair and in the air, like, oh, what will we ever do? And we're never going to figure this out. But admitting when we don't know, admitting when we're struggling with something, sharing just a little bit of self-disclosure, so that people can see that I'm a person beyond my title, and then making space for others to do the same, tends to create more space for vulnerability and then for problem solving and let's figure this out together. I also just try really hard to, and I heard someone say this once, that when you're trying to pursue change, people really benefit from also being rooted in what's not going to change, right? Like what's going to stay the same that I can hold to. So I have some steady ground as I try to be open to something that will feel different. And then finally, people want to be part of building something together, and people are more likely to embrace change that they were a part of creating. So creating space for people to do that is really my process for leading transformational change. A lot of, and also defining people's role in the work. So, because I want people to feel like they have more leverage to make a final decision if that's like not appropriate for a particular situation, but also naming for people how their voice shaped the work. I think allows people to see, oh, this is a little bit about something that I've been talking about that was a struggle, or this little part of my idea, like I can see it unfolding in this piece. And that, I think, generates some momentum for people to feel like there was collective impact, to go back to what you were mentioning about Hattie.
There's so many tangents within what you just shared. We could go down these forever. We could go down the tangent of there's a difference between transparency and vulnerability and just offloading all of your feelings. The ability to come in and be transparent with people and say, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, and that's okay. I'm going to figure it out, though. That's my job, to figure it out. That's why I'm here, is because I'm really good at figuring out what I need to do. Some people don't fully have that understanding when you come into that moment, which, once you can establish that, it's very powerful. We could also jump to, the Simon Sinek of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, and teaching people the why behind things to build that collective efficacy, to establish a sense of ownership, to have those people want to dive in and really kind of root back to their earth and bring them back to the core value. And this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is how you're a part of doing what we're doing. We need to do this together, or it's not going to work. It's actually going to be the opposite and completely fail. And it's going to turn into, a trend or a fad or something that somebody tried to impose on you, and you're going to have misalignment, and we're not going to get to where we go. And the whole important part of that is how things are delivered to people, and how we say things to people, and how we interact with people. And that kind of goes with your mantra of words matter. So can you share a moment where your words or someone else's made a transformative difference in a difficult time? And how did the mantra words matter come to you?
Well, I was an English teacher, so I've always loved words. And I think probably some of my best writing or my best work comes from my own pain. And I think there's some quote out there, right? Like nothing bad can happen to an author or a writer because they use it for their content. But the truth is, the things that I've written or said, like words matter. I used to say, words matter, our actions matter, we matter. And it was so sad that I have to remind us how deeply we matter. But I just feel like there was a period of time in education, and maybe still today, where people weren't feeling like what they were doing was making any kind of difference. And I think I probably was in a little bit of a dark place when I came up with this mantra, because I think I wasn't feeling either seen or valued or like what I was doing was making any kind of difference. And so I started testing out different things on Twitter to see if other people were feeling the same. And I put I first started with other people's words And before that, I had my Twitter locked down because I was like, oh my gosh, scary Twitter. Someone might find something I wrote on here. And then I was like, someone might find something I wrote on here. And it became a positive thing, right? And
Yeah.
so when I was finally brave enough to start sharing my own thoughts on Twitter, which was probably, sadly, a year after opening my account to the public, I started to see that other people were connecting with this idea that our words matter. And I think it's because we've all been on either side of that. Like we've either experienced the power of somebody saying something that made us feel like we could try again tomorrow and that we were seen and valued. We've also experienced things that people have said and probably unbeknownst to them have really torn us down, and if unintentionally even have really made us question ourselves. So just this past week, I've just so appreciated people who are willing to take a moment to send a text and remind you of something that you're doing that's making a difference. I think it's easy to assume for people who are superintendents or have, big scary district office titles that we don't need that because, we must get that all the time, or we must just know that like if that's something we're doing is making a difference. And I got two or three texts this past week, and two of them were from previous places I worked, telling me that things that we worked on together are making a big difference and they're still in motion. And for me to know that like I was a part of that story still, even though I don't work in that district anymore, that meant a lot to me. And then someone who I'm new to the team, who said to me that that I was what I represented in my interview, and that I truly make people feel seen and valued, and that that I was the real deal essentially. And that made me feel really valued and seen myself. So I would just say, like, there's no small actions in a school, no small words in a school. And I just experienced that for myself this past week.
And, listeners, your motivation and your attitude towards this is probably lower one right now, but this is your prompt that's at least that one or two. We've all been in that PD where somebody says, pull out your phone and text somebody you haven't texted in a while. Just check in and see how they're doing and let them know. And you know what? I'm actually going to push you to do something different. I mentioned this earlier in an episode. I'm going to ask you, instead of that prompt, I want you to email yourself, and I want you to schedule it 2 months from now. And I want you to write a quick email to yourself that says, hey, at the time of writing this is where you're at. This is how things are going. This is what you're hoping to have achieved within those 2 months. And then 2 months from now, when you open that email, that's your reminder to write another one 2 months from now, and to keep checking in on yourself as well, because as much as we check in on other people, we often forget the self-reflection too. So take a moment, schedule that. I try that every 2 months, and it's what keeps me aligned to what I'm trying to do as well. It might work a little bit. I don't have the research to back it up, so hopefully one day I do, and we'll go from there. But what these reminders do, what these check-ins do, is they actually build our ability to build that grit, to build that perseverance. I have to share, actually, I have to go off track here a little bit and say, when we say words matter and we matter and you matter, the science nerd in me always makes the pun of you matter. And I talk about, you're not dark matter, you're matter. And so you have to remember that there's not a darkness in you. It's just matter. It's who you are. And we're meant to shine as we all are. And it's about sharing those shining moments, because none of us are made of the opposite of the antimatter or the dark matter. No one's here to bring darkness. But that being said, persevering through adversity often paves the way for recognizing the need for change. And when you think about creating environments for storytelling and collaboration, what's the first change you believe needs to happen to make these spaces thrive?
I think proximity builds trust. And so when I talked about being around people, simply being together in the work or side by side in the work, we start to slowly get more comfortable self-disclosing or talking about problems or socializing solutions. And I'm a big fan of also the sacrificial draft, putting sacrificial drafts in front of people so people know, like, this isn't done. This isn't something I'm asking for your feedback, but it's already, like, how perfectly packaged it is. Like, that if you say something not great about it, like, you've just completely torn down, what's supposed to move forward. Like, I'm really big on showing the messy process part and letting people be on the inside of that part of it. But, I'm also trying to just create space for less focus on our to-do list and more focus on our to-be list. So I have this culture and climate team that I lead, and this past week we used this acronym from Otherful, but it's FIRE. So it's Every letter stands for something, that you self-disclose about yourself. And, you talk about your interests, or you talk about your responsibilities or your experiences, or your fears. That's what the F stands for. And I was shocked and amazed at how quickly people were getting into some really vulnerable things. But I also had to make small moves to cultivate a space where that could be true. So like I, share a little bit of myself first. I also let people sit with people that they know first. So often like in PD, we jump right into icebreakers. We jump right into like, talk to somebody you don't know. And it's like, okay, hang on a second. Like, let's give people the safety of people that they know. And then let's give them space to like self-reflect a little bit. And then we might move them in that experience into randomized groupings. In building thinking classrooms in mathematics, there's a big thing there about randomized groups and groups of 3 if the kids are in 3rd grade or higher. So I try to model that for the adults too, groups of 3 and randomized, but I don't do it right at the jump. And then I unpack and I name the moves that I've made, so that not just the work we're working on, but then the teachers are affirmed about things that they might already be doing or might take back into their classroom the very next day. So it's a yes and twofer situation when we're building together. Busy teachers have like ideas that they could take right into their classroom the next day. And because I'm naming the moves that we're making to get the work done while we're getting the work done.
And you're heavily rooting that in research behind almost every psychologist that's out there. I know one specifically, Dr. Don Castaldi, who talks about the fight, flight, or freeze response, and the brain loop of going through, is this safe? Is this not safe? Can I think critically to make a decision? And we can't think critically to make a decision if we don't feel safe. And what's the best way to make people not feel safe is put them in a room with a bunch of people they don't know and ask them to talk to each other. You'll never make any progress with there until you can create that impact of safety and comfort. So what you're doing is actually very heavily rooted in research too, that says you need to create the safe space before you push people out of their comfort zone. So I really appreciate that. Now, in the intro, I mentioned your book a little bit. I want to give you some time to do it justice and more than what I could probably share about the book. So I want to give you a second to just maybe open up about where it came from, what people can expect if they were to buy your book. And then in it, you empower educators to focus on what matters most. What would be an example from the book that's a small move that led to a ripple effect of a positive change?
Yeah, so Legacy of Learning came out about a year ago, and I wrote a book that I just personally needed, and it kind of was inspired by threads that, themes that continued to emerge in my blog, and that I would safely crowdsource in a blog kind of way and see if it resonated with anybody. And then I started to see that there were some patterns of things that I was talking about that were getting more momentum. And I wondered if maybe there was a book there for people. So I've heard other people call my book like SEL for adults, which is not really what I meant to write, but that's cool that people see that. I know that's kind of a politicized term anymore. And so I'm not really trying to be anything other than just a practical support to educators. And I think sometimes we, in service of learning and kids, we leap over the adults and focus on, that phrase, what's best for kids. But in my experience, one of the best ways to take great care of kids and their learning is to take great care of adults and their learning. So that's a big part of the book, is managing the workload and managing and taking great care of ourselves so that we can take great care of other people, and practical moves for doing both. I often say, my expectations for learning are high, but my expectations for how we treat each other are even higher. And so small moves in the book, we start with a more self-reflective and self-management practices space. How do we manage all this work that we have coming in, and how do we decide what matters most? Place into what are the moves that we all know are good and true, that require little to no planning, that probably the noise of our profession have maybe caused us to question or forget about, and how do we get back into some of those moves? And as an example, simply greeting students at the door. There's Edutopia article. The research shows that kids have 20% higher, engagement time to task when a teacher just is excited to see them, uses their name, greets them at the door. Discipline goes down by 9%. And you had no extra planning, but you did have to be intentional, and you did have to commit to that small move. But that can do a lot for student learning in the classroom and required no lesson planning on our part. And so those are just examples of some of the moves that we get into when we talk about actual classroom practices, just things that teachers know in their teacher gut is good that I just want to affirm and bring back to the forefront of their mind, that can make a big impact for themselves and for kids.
And alchemists, I talk about this all the time when we talk about the air element and the water element and the impact of change and resilience. Change is the only constant that we'll face throughout our lives, and you have the ability through small acts to influence change and drive change. And it's these small acts like greeting somebody at a door. It doesn't need to even be in a school setting. It can be in whatever workplace or organization setting you're in. Greeting people creates that collective efficacy movement that we know is effective no matter where you are. So why not try to drive the change in a positive direction versus responding to changes that happen in negative directions, right? And the perfect thing that you just shared is the Edutopia article that alludes to, a 9% decrease in discipline. Well, guess what? If you're not greeting people and you're not doing those things, discipline's probably going up, right? And now you're dealing with the change and the resilience of discipline and behavior. So it's the proactive movement. And high expectations are an act of love, where low expectations are an act of apathy. So if you love where you are, keep setting those high expectations, because it shows that you love the people around you. And more often than not, as a school principal, the conversations that I have with kids, we do this because we love you guys. We do this because we care, and we expect so much of you because we believe in you. Right? If we didn't believe in you, we wouldn't be pushing, we wouldn't be questioning, we wouldn't be driving. So thank you so much for taking a minute to share that. Where can people get your book?
So my book's available on Amazon. You can also find my book at Barnes & Noble. So those are the two places that it's easiest to get my book. And if people get my book, first of all, I'll be so excited if you get my book. That's such an honor. If you read my book, I would love to connect with you just to hear more about what resonated, because I'm finding the biggest surprise in writing that book is the sense of community, and with other people who read the book and said, wow, me too. And I believe these things too, and I'm working on similar things. It's really brought some really special people into my life that I've had the opportunity to learn from. And so I'd love to keep connecting with really smart, caring educators.
And I know that in a past role, there was education consulting and there was some work behind that. Does your book get leveraged and utilized that way, where organizations, people can bring your book in and then bring you in potentially?
Yes, thank you for asking. Yes, I've had some speaking engagements where I've done a keynote at some conferences, or PD events that people have put on, and then done some small group breakouts with those groups. I've also done some leadership development consulting and strategic planning consulting, with not just schools, but actually like a mom and pop construction company, which was pretty fun. And it was fun to see that a lot of things that we're struggling with in education are not totally unique to the world and to other industries. I know we don't love hearing that sometimes as educators. We think that all of our problems are just education problems, but actually we have a lot to learn and share across industries. And I think that that's really making my work smarter.
And I actually so dislike that it's so, when people say it's just a unique to education thing, it's not, because we're all people. And when you look at what education is about, it's about working with people. And so then you look at every organization that requires you to work with people, which is a ton, right? Any service industry that's out there requires you to work with people, any organization. And those problems can be quite similar. And more often than not, education world actually pulls from like the business management work style, and we try to take what's going well in business management and apply it in education settings. And not often enough does the reverse happen, where business management styles are looking at what educators are doing and pulling from there. We talked about the work of collective efficacy, and I stood on my pedestal and I said, this is an amazing thing that people need to consider. That doesn't just stand for the unique little niche that you're in. Niche, I've heard both actually. I'm going to stay with niche. that people are in, it can be that community, right? And you can establish collective efficacy, like you said, in branching outside of the educational world and working with people that don't even think they have that tangent on education, because you're rooted back in your earth element of experience, which is a very cool value to have, because that value of experience everybody wants. Everybody wants experience in things. That's not just education restricted. So you talked about the mom and pop organization, which is very cool to go and work with as well. Probably not rooted in necessarily the education factor, but rooted in a similar connection to what your book's about. So thank you very much for sharing that as well. Now, with it as well, you speak very often about restoring hope, happiness, curiosity. Can you share a story where you witnessed community embrace and emerge stronger with that concept of hope and curiosity?
Yeah, so I was a part of creating a teacher educator program, right, where kids who might be interested in being a teacher. And in my previous school district, and I got to hear, actually got to see some kids and that teacher who started that educator program at a conference last week. And it was just really inspiring to be reminded about the work that we did together and the work that they're continuing to do. And they reminded me of things that we did that I want to bring into my new district. Just things like, student panels to make sure we're hearing from kids about the experience that we're providing them, and a program where kids might want to be a teacher and they're doing internships in elementary schools in their own school district, and then coming back and talking about the teaching practices that they're learning and trying. Is they're living in two worlds at a really unique time. Like, they're living the student experience and they're also trying to be teachers, and now they're privy to the moves that their teachers might be making at the high school level, or not be making for that matter. And it's like this really interesting reflection that happens for them. And so they've started providing professional learning to teachers on PD days. And that's the thing that I thought that would be because we have an future educators program in my current school district too. And I think it's really incredible when teachers learn from kids in learning sessions. Like, they were telling me they led a session on movement, how important movement is to the brain and in the classroom. And then one of the students said that one of their teachers came to their session, and then the next week in class, having never used movement in the classroom, was using some of the strategies that they learned from that student the very next week, which kudos to that teacher, right? To be so humble to say, okay, this is cool. I should have maybe been doing this. I'm going to try it. And then for the kid to see that they did the thing that made a difference, and that teacher is now doing the thing that they learned from them. I just thought that was a really beautiful story of impact. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I cultivate more of that now in my new educational community?
I love that. And my head went instantly to one of my teachers who's modeling a new class that we've asked them to do. It's a fitness-based class. They get a career and technology studies credit for the class. It's just an exercise class. And I say just because I'm trying to downplay what he's doing, but it's actually quite incredible. He has each kid learning about the foundations of training and the principles of training. But the one task that he asks them to do is to build their own workout. And in building their workout, he then asks them to share their workout with the people that are in the class. And they get to lead the class for a bit. And he said it's been the highest motivated classes. The kids are into it. The person teaching it's into it. They love what they're doing. And the next conversation that we're building towards is, how can you take what you're doing there, because you have this high prompt on motivation, you have this high prompt on behavior, and you have the high prompt on the prompt itself because the kids are saying it too. How can you take what you're doing in this class and translate it to your English class, translate it to your math class, translate it to your science, your social classes, or your history class, wherever you may be and what core subjects you may have? How do we bridge that gap between what's considered the fun class and bring it to the core academic class? And it's giving them charge in that empowerment. Going a whole step further and bringing up the realm of teacher development, that's something that it makes me nervous to try, but it's something that I want to try doing and asking my students, because they know what they need best. And to give them time to share that gives them buy-in as well. It creates not just that collective efficacy with the teachers, it brings it with the students as well. And then you fully become aligned and driven. With that, that's a big change. And even talking that out loud, there is some risk required in that, which brings us a bit to the fire element section here, which talks about risk and decision making. And risk requires courage. When you think about the work you've done in leadership development and strategic planning, what's been the boldest decision or one that's required a lot of courage from you to make, and what did you learn from it?
I mean, I have learned a lot from doing work across industries because I think a lot of us underestimate the skills that we have, and to be confident that what we have to say can matter in a different industry is something that I've learned. But guess I would also say that I've done a lot of work that I was scared to do. Like I think sometimes you can't outpace your community's readiness for change, but you also have to be willing to make change even when done well, even when other people disagree. And so, I mean, I've led some changes in some very traditionally successful communities, changes like, removing valedictorian, salutatorian in favor of a Latin honors system at graduation to celebrate more students and finding more ways to celebrate more students. And or removing class rank from transcripts or changing the way we weighted grades. I went through a process then and I brought this parent of a student in the number one spot, right? To say like, hey, I think the story we're telling ourselves is that these things are important because this is what colleges are looking for. But are those true stories? I mean, I think we did this whole research where we realized like colleges are actually like undoing all of the way we weight grades, so that they can, because everyone's doing that differently. I mean, having the parent alongside us, calling the universities herself and asking those questions, and then realizing that the things that we said we were doing in service of the future for kids actually wasn't true anymore, gave me the confidence to say we were onto something and that we're doing something that's making kids feel like they're like in this rat race, right? And that they need to take classes that they don't even get excited about, just to get ahead of the pack to build their future. I remember feeling though, like before that board meeting, because of the kind of things that boards approve, that I was going to throw up. I thought people were going to come with pitchforks to this meeting. And I actually had hired a job coach to, I thought she was going to help me figure out what I wanted to do in the future, but really she just helped me get better at the job I was in. And she said, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen here? And I said, well, people show up to this meeting really mad and they speak out against me. And then she's like, okay, and then what happens? And I'm like, and then I end up on the local news. And she's like, okay, and then what happens? And I'm like, and then I get fired. And she's like, okay, and then what happens? I'm like, okay, lady, I just got fired. Like, did you not hear that part of the story, right? And she was saying, like, but you would be okay, right? Like on the other side of all of that, like you're a strong person with skills and you're doing things for the right reasons. Like, do you believe in what you're doing? And I said, yes. And, she said, okay, so you're doing the right thing. So just lay your head on your pillow at night and go to sleep knowing that you're in it for the right reasons. You've done this the right way. You believe in what you're doing. And if something happens, you have enough skills to land on your feet, and whatever happens is going to happen. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but something about like fear setting allowed me to navigate change, big scary change.
And what she did is she rooted you back to your value, and she brought you back to your earth, and she said, is this something you're rooted in? Is this something that you truly believe in? Is it a core value to you? And if the answer is yes, then we need to remove the fear of living by our values and being values driven, because then you could conform, but you're not going to feel fulfillment. And that's where burnout happens, right? We talk about teacher burnout. We talk about teacher retention. We talk about even just workplace burnout and retention and how people dread going to work, because more often than not, you're not bringing your values to your workplace, and your workplace isn't letting your values come out as well. And when those two can align and you can create that, you create a workplace system where people enjoy going to where they're going. And you know what, Megan, we could go down this big tangent on universities as well. When you bring it up, my head goes to wanting to talk about the massive disconnect between K-12 education and higher education. And what people often don't realize is a lot of the people teaching higher education don't have Bachelor of Education degrees. They're doctors in their fields, they're masters in their fields, and they've been asked while they're doing their research to share what they're finding with the people to help them bridge that gap on degrees. And so that's an example where we take an educational institution and we don't actually realize how much education and pedagogy that institution is lacking. And that's the bridge and the connect. We can learn a lot from the things that post-secondary institutions do, but we need to collaborate with them more because there's a lot they can learn from us as well and how we deliver instruction and bring instruction. Gone should be the days of sitting in a lecture hall of 1,000 people scribbling notes for 2 hours. I failed my anatomy class the first time I took it because it was taught in the worst possible way. I showed up to every class, worked as hard as I did. And it wasn't until the pedagogy changed the next year that it was able to work for me. Because I was able to connect with it a bit better, but I had to work so hard to get that first Bachelor of Science degree, just the disconnect there. Sorry, I can go on a tangent on that for a very long time, but I love the story and the message you're sharing. A very powerful one, that risks are not risks if they're rooted in your core value. Bringing it back to that, if you had to take one more risk today, which I know a new job, it might be a bold statement having you come out and say that. So if we don't want to go down that tangent, we don't have to. But if you could make one big, bold decision today, I know it's going to be something rooted in this core value of experience or this core value of relationships or this core value of being better together. What would it be?
I think a lot of us, if we could design school the way we know it can grow learning and grow people. There's a lot of things that are currently true about the design of K-12 school that we've all inherited that have felt really difficult to challenge or change. And so I think I would love to create space for a group of people to say, let's forget everything we ever knew and what actually makes sense for doing right by kids and their learning. Like what makes sense for our brains, the learning process, creating belonging in the schoolhouse and high engagement. I imagine that there's certain things that we wouldn't be doing anymore. We probably wouldn't be shuffling kids, from class to class and have them learning in isolation and assign them letter grades and, right? So I think if I could just be bold and brave, it would be to say, let's completely start over.
And we don't have enough time to go down the rabbit hole of what does that dream fully look like. But, I'll allude to, if we're talking about experience being a huge value that the world believes in and that you believe in, it's probably going down to what kind of exposures can we give these people at these young ages to help them determine what path they want to try and go on, right? You brought it back to yourself saying you didn't grow up wanting to be a teacher. And it wasn't until you had the experience of it that you learned that, hey, this is something I kind of like doing. And that's very similar to myself, as I didn't realize that I liked education until I had the experience and exposure to education. So very, very cool thought. I would love to see where that goes. Now, this is a bit of a bigger question, but what are you hoping people action in their lives tomorrow from your message today?
I hope people can feel encouraged. I think people are doing better than they think. I think we're really hard on ourselves. I think also we don't have to have all the answers or have some big plan. We just need to figure out what's the next best move to make and to make that move and learn from it. And then what comes next after that. Like it's just day after day, like forward is forward. What's one thing that we can do and continue doing if it's working? And that is a way to build sustainable change. And it's okay to move small if you continue moving in the right.
I love that. And Meghan, I know new role this year, but what does your future look like?
I always struggled with that question. I talked about hiring a job coach because I was trying to answer that question 8 years ago in my career. I just really want to do work I believe in with people I enjoy. And so if that's true, I can be very satisfied with that. I think life is too short to not enjoy the work. This doesn't mean we're going to enjoy every moment of the work and that there aren't going to be hard days. But as someone who lost, my dad was really young when he passed. I think he was 33. I'm 42 now. So every year that I live beyond what he got to experience is a gift to me. And I'm really living this life for both of us now. And so I just don't want to take it for granted. I want to live well and enjoy my work. And so whatever that looks like is what it looks like.
I love the belief behind that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, it's probably in the book, but for those that want to bypass that for now, how can our listeners get in touch with you and connect?
Yeah, I would love to connect with people. So you can find me on X. It's Meghan_Lawson. My first name has an H. My mom had to make it hard for everybody. So Meghan_Lawson. And then Instagram, it's just Meghan Lawson blog. Or you can find me on my website. It's where I'm blogging every week. I usually blog on a Saturday or Sundays. And that's just meghanlawson.com.
And we'll link all of that in the description of our episode. So, alchemists, as we wrap up the episode, I also want to just take a moment and share my appreciation for you as a listenership. You're the reason we're here. You're the inspiration for the show. I hope that our journey today sparked some points of interest for you to dive deeper. Make sure you subscribe to the monthly newsletter. Make sure you check out the work of Meghan Lawson for these actionable strategies and in-depth analysis of not just our episodes, but the work that she's doing as well. And reach out on our Instagram for any link you want. Reach out to Meghan for any link you want. And Meghan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to connect, collaborate, and empower us all through your lived experiences.
I'm so inspired by the storytelling you're doing on this podcast and the research that you're sharing. So thank you to you and everybody who's listening. And it's been a true honor and pleasure today.
You've been listening to The Elemental Educator. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator.